Welcome to Face2Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face2Face.
So my next interview is with Ian Toews. He is a Canadian filmmaker, documentarian, storyteller who is going into his second season with a series on Vision TV called Ageless Gardens. Fascinating series, entertaining. It's one of those documentaries where you think, I'm not really sure that I'm going to be interested in this. And the moment you step in, you kind of can't turn away. I mean, this is a film about, like any great, or a series, I guess, but these are films. These are short films about the environment. They're about climate change, and they're about wisdom and hope and life and how we behave in our environments and with others. We talk about music and being guided by nature, and there's just so many beautiful metaphors as well. I mean, you're going to learn how to cook better. We talk about youth and growing old and growing old with wisdom and how gardening can actually bring out the best in all of us. We talk about things like as simple as baking, but baking in a very particular way, and I'll leave that out there for you to find out more about. But we talk about the wild harvests and about making good choices and just this idea of organisms in the soil and how life is in the soil. And one particular episode where there's a focus on that, and as a symbol and as a metaphor, it just means so much more. So you're going to enjoy the interview with Ian. Ian is wonderful. We go pretty deep on this, and we have a great time as well. And you're going to enjoy the series as well. So check it out, Vision TV, coming soon to a digital home theater near you. And don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my writing and my public speaking. You can purchase a copy of Real Change is Incremental there. If you don't already have it, man, it's still flying off the shelves all these years later. And if you want to learn more about Face2Face, you can go to the website, face2facelive.ca. If you haven't already downloaded the podcast onto your device. You can also support us through patreon.com. We have a few supporters there now monthly. And if you can't do that financially, which I totally understand and totally get, really would love for you to leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify. It really does help us get word out on the street. And please sign up for our newsletter. We send that out a few times a year as a reminder, and you can do that. You can also advertise on Face2Face. Banner ads, you can get up on the website. We can do shout outs. We're really quite flexible over here. And we've got a whole slew of interviews coming up from the Toronto International Film Festival. I was fortunate enough to be able to really connect with a few gems there along the way. So stay tuned for those. And don't forget to rabble.ca. I'm also appear on that platform. News for the rest of us, bloggers, podcasters, writers, people talking about things that matter. Check them out there. But stay tuned. Don't touch that dial. Ian Toews coming right up, talking about his new series, Ageless Gardens. Well, welcome to Face2Face. We're joined by a very special guest here with us today, somewhere in the country, I think, out on the West Coast. Ian Toews is here to talk about his new, not film so much, and maybe he can talk a little bit about that from a stylistic perspective, but here to talk about a series now going into season 2, Ageless Gardens on Vision TV. Ian, thanks for taking the time to join us here on Face2Face today.
Thanks for having me, David.
So agelessgardens.ca is where people can find out a little bit more information about what you're up to. I think we're going into maybe 5 episodes, season 2. Is that 10 episodes overall? About 5 hours worth of TV. Is that right?
It's partly right. So it's 5 episodes per season. We've done 2 seasons. They're about 30 minutes each. So that would give us 2.5 hours worth of material.
Got it. And that probably includes commercials, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So really, when you get down to brass tacks, it's 23 minutes or
It's
so.
23 minutes.
You
Yeah.
really want to split hairs, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Depends how much you can fast forward through the commercials. And I think currently season 1 is available online for free, of course, for anyone who wants to view that.
Yeah, it's there, and they've been streaming it for a while. And then my understanding, I don't want to be I don't want to be wrong about this, but I think they'll be doing the same when our second season is released. They'll probably put it online right away. But if I'm wrong, don't hold it. Don't hold it against me.
Don't hold it against me. You're going to get a lot of hate mail over that, Ian.
Yeah, that's it.
So tell me. It seems to me that I've seen a couple episodes, and by the way, congratulations! What a beautiful project. What a I mean, come on, gardens, plants, flowers—they're just asking to be photographed, aren't they?
Yeah, they sure are. It's fun to photograph them, and it's some ways almost, I hate to say this, but it's kind of in a way easy because there's just so many good views, right? Like you said, they just want to be looked at. Good light, bad light, even that, it doesn't affect it that much,
Kind of. One of the things that I was really struck by as I watched a couple of the episodes and was the symbol and the metaphor, and also, plants are dying to be photographed. So are people. It seems to me. I mean, doesn't a face sort of tell 1,000 stories depending on your perspective and your context and your position and how you read and read things and all of that. I mean, I would hope an artist would say that, but people are interesting, plants are interesting, and where that sort of symbolic and metaphorical crossover lies is fascinating, and it really comes out in the series.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and it always, it's for me, it's always when we start talking about plants and why you grow them, that's when it opens up and everybody just starts talking about their deep beliefs. Hopefully they talk about their beliefs and why they do it, and how they've spent many years digging in the soil, and you get to know them on a really personal level, but also on a sort of a deep level where you get to really understand what their beliefs are. And another thing about our series is we focus in on particularly sort of mature people, mature gardeners, older gardeners, if you will. I mean, some of these folks that we filmed with are in their 80s and 90s, so there's just a depth of life experience there that when it works well, we get to really know people that have that much knowledge. And as I get older, I really appreciate people who've been around for a while that have a lot to share, because decades, 9 decades of life on Earth, and maybe 8 of those decades even gardening, there's a lot to be heard.
It's
that
interesting.
what you're saying, but
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I just, as you were reflecting on it, I thought of a lovely Oscar Wilde quote about experience is the name we give to our mistakes, and I've always smiled at that. I've smiled at lots of Oscar Wilde. I'm a big fan, but there's a deep sort of irony in that, but there's also this deep embedded truth, and I get it, and it's connected to wisdom, it seems to me, and I really get that from the guests on the show, that there's a, like you say, this sense of experience, long life experience, and they're bringing that not only to how they garden, but what they're actually taking from it as well. And what do you think about, connected to that, this whole idea is youth is wasted on the young? Is that kind of an underlying tone for your series?
Yeah, I wonder. It's like I said, I'm at that certain age where I'm kind of leaving my youth behind me, but I'm not quite I'm not quite as advanced as some people. So I'm right in the middle, just looking back on my youth and looking forward to what's coming next. I don't know. I wonder. I wish I was a little wiser when I was younger. I must say that. But my experience was certainly my own, and I made a lot of stupid mistakes for sure. But at the same time, I meet young folks that really have their heads screwed on properly, it seems. So I don't know if I'm the best judge of it.
I'm pretty sure I remember Anthony Hopkins being interviewed about that, and I don't know why I even remember it was him or what it was connected to. But he's like, "Yeah, who actually says that? Youth is wasted on the young. Old people say that," which is just kind of interesting, right?
Yeah. For sure.
So talk to me a little bit about what drew you in here. I mean, health. I mean, there's so many levels of stepping into a project like this. Are you a gardener? Do you got that green thumb? Is this healthy way of aging, which is sort of what the whole series is about, it seems to me, and just taking a step back and slowing down, paying attention. I mean, there's so many wonderful things underlying all
Hmm.
the great stories and the great images.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've got a long sort of tradition in our company of making films about. I used to be really narrowly focused on nature and art, and it keeps broadening out to include other things. And those other things, generally speaking, are, I'd like to say, things that are, that show us a better way of doing it, a better way of getting through the world, right? So gardening can be one of those things. Food can be one of those things. Whatever it is, literature, art, all these things that make us better and enrich us and um, just sort of bring us balance. So this fit nicely into that kind of philosophy. This project. I'm a bit of a gardener. I'm certainly humbled when I'm around these gardeners because they're so again, that those decades of experience, you can't compete with that. The knowledge of plant names, Latin plant names,
Mm.
soil types, different ways of pruning the same plant, 3 different ways for it. Like that, it's just bewildering how much people know. So to call myself a gardener is, well, not really fair to the word, but
It,
I sure enjoy it, and it's so beautiful. And I really, like I said, I'm always seeking out like the deeper meaning in these things and the deeper experience and exchange with the folks that do the gardening. So in that regard, it works out not unlike you're doing now, just interviewing people and getting to know them, getting to know what they really feel and believe. It's a great, I guess, a garden is a great conduit for that.
well, there was in one of the episodes I watched, it was in season 1. I think it kind of wraps up near the end about I think I extended it, but something about camaraderie, and I couldn't
Hmm.
help but think about the community. And I would I would imagine a lot of gardeners are quite nerdy in their own way, and
Hmm.
I mean I think anyone who gets into a hobby, craft, anything like this, there's aspects to the subculture, right? That
Hmm.
that would create multiple points of connection for people to build relationships, and it's really quite wonderful, and seems to have almost well, almost there is a spiritual component. It seems it comes out in some of the people and some of the guests that you follow, the people that you follow.
It is indeed. And it's funny you mentioned that because one of our episodes this season is called Gardens of the Spirit. And we talked to a number of different people about how gardening kind of taps into that spiritual need in all of us. We talked to some monks near Kamloops who are
Mm.
actually, they're the silent type, if you will. I can't remember the name for that, but they don't speak very often, but they do for our cameras. We also go to the Toronto Music Garden and talk to one of the directors of the Toronto Music Garden program, Tamara Bernstein, and she talks all about uh, what the idea of that is. I mean, that's a beautiful space. You're from Toronto. You're out on the
Hmm.
waterfront, and there's airplanes roaring by, and there's cars roaring by, but yet people are belting out this beautiful, mostly classical music in this garden setting, and it just changes your whole day when you're sitting there. And
Mm.
that one is in that episode. And we also spend time with some folks in really remote parts of northern Canada where they discover gardening as a way to sort of reconnect with health and wellness and the self in a good way, in a positive way. So it's so many good things about gardening can be brought out when you garden, basically.
When you're in the middle of it, it's
Yeah.
something like that's the thing that really struck me. So I did a little bit of gardening as a kid, and I marveled at the fact that wow, we grew a couple carrots this summer, and we were able to get some peas and a few tomatoes. I think we had cucumbers as a kid, and we have a small plot of land, and my wife Elizabeth grows tomatoes and zucchinis and a few things, and it's always really quite magical.
Hmm.
And it's crazy and almost cliche and corny as that kind of sounds, to say, wow, this was from our garden. And so we had one of our first really lovely and ripe tomatoes last night. And we both agreed unanimously that there's nothing quite like it, the
Hmm.
taste. And I think too, that one of the things that came out of one of the episodes about there's just this sense of pride and
Hmm.
accomplishment, that this is the product of course, nature and soil and water and all these things coming together, but also your hands.
Hmm. Yeah, you just sort of guide it. You let nature do most of the work, but you just guide it. It's pretty beautiful. My son, interestingly, speaking of tomatoes and family gardening, my son and my wife came upon this program through NASA where tomato seeds were sent as part of an experiment on one of the shuttle missions.
Hmm.
And so I don't know how many hundreds or perhaps thousands of seeds were sent to space and then brought back down. So NASA organized the experiment around distributing these seeds to people, just general people, citizen science, to try to grow these seeds to see what would happen, what the difference would be between those and Earth seeds that had only been on Earth. So my son got 2 packets of seeds. One, we don't know which was which, but one was marked A and one was marked B. And A or B had been in outer space, and A or B would have been on Earth only.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So they had
Did he dress up like Doctor Who when you guys were finding them? Or?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
But he had to. So he had to germinate the seeds and then grow them. And then in the end, I think we had about 50 little plants. And then the report back to NASA how well they responded, and you try to keep the conditions equalized. And as it turns out, I think it was the ones from space that grew just a little bit better, strangely, with his 50 plants. But it was just magical, right? You think of this little kernel and it's put in soil, but not only that, this kernel has been in outer space. Like the whole thing just gets kind of into this.
Well, it really does. So I've studied philosophy for years, and Aristotle talked about actuality and potentiality. We're not going to get into the depths of that, I promise you, out there, people listening out there. But there's something deeply, to me, philosophical about all these symbols and metaphors as well, and something profound and metaphysical about it. It's deeply relational, connected to community. I mean, it just goes on, and you can see why people get so pulled into it. But this idea of what is in that tiny little seed, and what and kind of like a golf shot in a way, but nowhere near as interesting. Right? A lot of things have to be going on to hit the ping pong ball, to get the dart in the bullseye, to get the ball in the green. In this case, it's really simple and yet deeply complex at the same time. I can't wait to see the marketing campaign, by the way, Seeds Aged in Space. I think that could actually fly really well.
Yeah. I don't know what NASA, they haven't published their results yet, but hopefully we'll find out some interesting stuff. But these seeds were distributed all over North America and maybe even the world, as far as I know. But all kinds of different kids did their little tests, right? Citizen science, that's a whole other subject. But
citizen science, I love it. That's really cool.
Pretty awesome stuff.
It really is pretty awesome. I mean, in a way, we're all taking part in a variety of different scientific experiments every day, right? We're in the middle of it, period. And so Marjorie Harris talks about, the author, I think it's in episode 1, Healing Plants, I believe was the title of it. And she talks about plants growing hope. Can you, I mean, I don't know how well you got to know Marjorie in the shooting of the series, but I'd love for you to go a little deeper on some of those, not just those metaphors, but that healing power. I mean, to me, there's something really important and substantive there, meaningful about healing, about mental health, about building stronger relationships, and growing closer to, as my yoga instructor would say, Mama Earth.
Yeah, I think that was the original organizing concept was to talk about. Oh, my chair is creaking. Sorry. The original organizing concept was to, and still is, to talk about gardening as a means of aging well, aging healthily, right. And so that comes up all the time. We see therapeutic gardens. We see people that are, practically pretty much hospitalized or in wheelchairs in different homes, accessing gardens, and you see their faces light up, and you start hearing them talk about their lives in really deep ways. It just brings out the best in people, right? You see their hands in the soil, and you can just you can almost, I mean, this sounds a little airy fairy, but you can almost see that energy when this sort of hands contact the earth. You just about see them light up a bit. It's quite a powerful experience. And I never see a frustrated gardener. I never see a pissed off gardener. They're always so.
They might be fussy, but they're not frustrated.
That's right, a little fussy, but they're always sort of tranquil and contemplative and thoughtful and accommodating and patient. And it's just time and time again, I find that with the people we're filming, it brings out the best in all of us, for sure it does. And I feel when I'm working with them, and I don't barely tire, I just feel that I'm getting energy when I'm around them. And I'm not one of those people that, has crystals and stuff and talks about the world energy and those kinds of things.
Right.
But I
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
not that there's anything wrong with it. And it's not that I don't believe it. It just don't really, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about those things too much. But when I'm around gardeners, I keep coming back to that the energy is so positive and powerful around them.
Well, and something deeply again, relational, comprehensive, we're all connected, or it's all connected, I suppose you could say. The truth of our being exists outside of ourselves, but deeply within as well. And I love how the thread, for me anyway, of the stories was, we talked about in nature. Somebody talked about the change in his body language when his hands went into the soil, serotonin levels, food as medicine, the ions coming off the water. How can it not affect us in pretty radical ways?
Well, yeah, all the studies you're referring to, that episode that we talked to a couple of people about soil, right, and the energy that's in the soil. That the quote often trotted out, and we use it all the time, is that there's millions of living organisms within a tablespoon of soil. Millions. It's just unbelievable, like microfungi and bacteria and protozoa, and just wow. It's that much energy, that much life at the microscopic level. You hold that in your hand, and you put a tomato seed in that, and something grows. It's bewildering how we're not just occupied staring at soil all day, but instead we're staring at bones. But we should be staring at the soil. There's just so much to be learned from it.
Hey, maybe are we onto another market here? Like, could we sell jars of soil?
Yeah, the time has come. Probably it's.
Well, you know what? Another thing that I thought was really cool about, I'm not sure who it was. It wasn't David Gregg, maybe.
Yeah.
Vermicompost specialist. I love that, by the way. I'd love to get that on my business card. There's something, just that healing, the healing properties of the soil. I was kind of fascinated by that. That this is the way it's been for hundreds and thousands of years. And this isn't something new. And like you say, it's not something that's airy-fairy or trite or cliche or new agey. I guess you could, I don't even know if people use that phrase anymore, but I could see some people sort of, getting wind of this show saying, oh yeah, that's a little, oh, you got to be older to do that. Or, well, hang on. There was a time when this is all we did.
That's right. Getting back to what we always did. And
did that come up a lot for you guys when filming this? And maybe you get into it in other episodes, but that idea between, I don't even know what you call them, commercial farms, I guess, versus, farming in the wild and so on.
Yeah, like there's some folks in our season this year. Just looking at my list here, it's the second episode in this season's series called Career Gardeners, and there's a 3-generation garden just near here in Victoria where they grow. They have a market garden, and that's their job now. The whole family, they do nothing but market gardening, and they do it all by hand. They actually only produce food on a little over an acre of land. There's probably about 5 or 6 acres there, but about 1 acre of it is in production, and the whole process is by hand and with intention. And when I interview them and I talk to them, and they say in the film, they talk about the intention in what they do and the goodness in what they do and the love that they put into the soil and the plants and stuff. And it's again, and you see it. You see the smiles on their faces. You see their kids running through the through the rows between that they're going to harvest and sell at the market, and they sell a bag of field greens or microgreens or tomatoes or cucumbers, and people just love them, right? You can see their customers enjoying them. There's just no mistaking that, right? I see that, I film that, I know, I can tell that that's real, like the quality and the belief in what they're doing and the health that comes from it. It's pretty, again, it's one of those things. I experience it when I'm out there. It's hard for me to articulate it other than to keep recording it.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think that's kind of, isn't that sort of the point, that you need to be in it to really understand it? You can't rationalize it. There's no mathematical formula for this one. you got to get out there, you got to get on your knees, you got to get your hands in the dirt, and you got to start planting some of those seeds aged in space, right? And,
Yeah.
and experimenting. And it's really quite wonderful. So a sort of a turn, maybe not the right way to put it, but people are way more, I would say, today, certainly in the West, healthy with respect to their eating habits and their approach, more intentionality, calories, potassium, salt levels, and all that. I would think that this type of an approach to farming and to producing vegetables and so on, and spices and all of that is there's a huge appeal for it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a mass market for this? I mean, is there a way to ultimately make this sustainable? And certainly organic is taking off, much more expensive still, but any thoughts on that? Any of your gardeners have any wisdom there?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the long run, if you do the math for the planet, I wouldn't want to be too fatalistic, but if you do the math, I'm not entirely sure any of it's sustainable in the long run. There's 7 billion of us now. There'll be
I
9
read,
billion.
Ian, recently we've got about 10,000 years left or something like that.
Oh, good. Okay, well,
Yeah,
we're well on our way.
That's right.
But
That's right.
the industrial agriculturalist folks would say, no, we need to mass produce on, clear cut acres, and, thousands of bushels of wheat need to be harvested off this land. So there's certainly two ways to look at it. But yeah, I think that getting back to the really localized level, there's also an economic argument to be made there too, right? If these folks that we filmed with, they, from their own labor, they produce this food and they sell it directly to consumers, and they yield that money right then and there, and there's no intermediary. So they're making a bigger chunk of the profit, right? They're making bigger profits, I guess, or the bigger part of the pie is cut to them. I'm not sure what your question was. I'm going in a different direction.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's all connected. It's just, is it ultimately this type of, just taking that kind of care when growing products? You kind of, you drive through, for those of us who live in Ontario and not too far north of Toronto, there's areas like this all over the world, I would imagine, but Holland Marsh, gorgeous. You can smell the onions and the leeks and the tomatoes in the air as you drive through this huge area of land. And I guess this is commercial farming, but it's still maybe not quite as commercialized as some. It's kind of like that whole fish farming. You got to be careful where you buy your fish from. What is a fish farm? Fish farm sounds great, but comes with footnotes, right? So
yeah.
I guess, how do you get this many people together taking this much care with their food and still get it down to a lot of people's plates? Or is the message that, me and my family should be out there doing the very same thing?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's always a level of what's realistic. Like we're just, in our own family, my wife and son and I were just harvesting a whole bunch of vegetables that were given to us from a friend who has a massive vegetable garden. And it's just this overabundance of food, right? That's been produced in this one really narrow window of time. Suddenly it's, August, September is like, you got to process all these vegetables and deal with them and freeze them and cut them up and puree them. And so the labor becomes a big part of it. And then my wife and son and I were just enjoying all this great food, and also saying, holy man, we've been working at the kitchen sink for 3 hours yesterday.
Right.
So there's a balance.
The practical realities of it.
But it's a very satisfying 3 hours.
Sure.
It's a very, very satisfying hours to be, cutting up apples and tomatoes and taking a bite of every third one. And so it's really a lifestyle choice, I'd say. I mean, we show in the film series, we show people doing wild harvest, foraged type of food. We show people doing these kind of smaller scale.
Was that David Gregg?
David Gregg was a soil
mushroom. Oh no, who's the mushroom guy?
Sinclair Phillip from the.
Thank you, Sinclair Phillips. Yeah,
that was first season, and that's from the famous Souk Harbor House, and they were one of the first restaurants in North America to do farm to table, right, or garden to table, as it were, or wild garden to table. I mean, they kind of started that. It was them in a restaurant in Berkeley that were doing 30 years ago.
The two of them, and I'm not sure what their relationship is, but it was quite comical in how they were. The younger guy was eating all the berries, and Sinclair was out doing all the work. It's really interesting, your comment kind of coming back full circle to the art and nature, and I think you talk about one of an artist, a sculptor who takes inspiration from the garden and so on. But when they came across that one mushroom,
Mm-hmm.
And they were just so thrilled and like, wow, this is almost like this is a piece of art. And I was really surprised that he cut it out, but I found it really fascinating that he went down really deep to make sure he got a lot of the, I guess, the root of the
Mm-hmm.
actual mushroom itself.
Yeah.
And he took a lot of care and the brushing off. It was really quite lovely. I'm assuming that went into somebody's soup or something or a salad not that long after.
Yeah, all of that stuff got cooked up. Yeah, it's yeah, and those mushroom people, that's a whole other level, right? And they try to tread lightly walking through the forest. And I mean, you mentioned the leeks and the onions in Ontario. I've also filmed a wild leek harvest in Ontario years ago on a different project. But there's another question, right? If you're doing wild harvest and you're out there trampling through the woods as gently as you can, that's one thing. But if 700 other people get the same idea on the same weekend, then suddenly it's a different story, right? So
It's like the gold rush, except with mushrooms or leeks.
yeah, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, a wild
Or
garlic, or
whatever.
whatever it wants to be. So there's a fine line. These are all
Right.
really
Yep.
really incredible ways of getting food and spending your time. But can we all do it? I'm not entirely sure. And
Well,
the
it's
same goes for gardening at home. If you want to grow, a whole bunch of produce in your home garden, there's a lot of time commitment involved with that, and that's great. But you're giving up other things. That's maybe less time
right.
on
Right.
Netflix, or maybe less
Sure.
time cycling to your volunteer job, or whatever you do with your time. There's only so many hours in the week, but it's also nice when people like the folks we film with the 3-generation garden, when we see them making such a beautiful garden and then selling those products to us, and we can give them money for it rather than give it to some multinational. And it's like, well, it's hardly any more expensive, and it's twice as tasty and 3 times as healthy. So maybe that's the way to go.
I got to tell you, I've just become so much more aware of food in the last little while. I've got some blood pressure issues, and looking at salt content, it's mind-boggling.
Oh goodness, yeah.
When you look at salt, I mean, truly mind-boggling. The gap is like you can get a third of your daily salt or recommended daily salt intake in one meal.
Yeah.
Or never mind a meal. How about just a sandwich? It's
Yeah.
really quite fascinating. So ways of stepping back into this, eating more healthy, aging well, and all that. I mean, the profound amount of wisdom here is I think is striking. It's interesting, Diane, the seaweed lady.
Yeah.
So she made a comment. I think she's on Victoria Island. I think 70 kilometers of sort of undisturbed coast.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of points to that. Wow, we don't want 700 seaweed ladies.
No.
Harvesting this area. So how do you manage that? And is that ever even going to be a problem? Probably not. But it's something to think about as we, I hope, step into more of an organic world.
Yeah, it's hard to say what the answer is, because it can, like I said, the leek harvest in Ontario is a well-known one that's been overdone. But then you can get beekeeping. We show beekeeping in our second season here. A beekeeper in the prairies in Regina who's harvesting he's got bees in a city neighborhood, and the bees go around and they pollinate off of marigolds and pansies,
Right.
and oxeye daisies and roses, and then they bring back all that pollen and honey to their hives, and he harvests that. And it's a lot of people can beekeep. There's beekeepers in downtown Toronto, and there's beekeepers in Brooklyn, and so it's all about choices. But I don't think we can, realistically, can we all do it? I don't know. There's probably not enough, if we were all doing that, we might have less time to do other things, but a good balance of it, more people doing it, and more respect and value given to those kinds of artisanal food
it's good.
processes. That's, I think, what we need. We need to see more of that. We see a lot of that in the West Coast where I live, and I see that in Toronto.
Yeah.
I was,
for sure.
A lot of that there.
Well, for sure. And I think too, just for people who can't afford it and who are at risk in one way or another, new Canadians, whatever the case might be, there are lots of people who can't afford to buy this kind of food because it is just too inaccessible. But maybe they can grow it, or maybe not. So I think one of the things that I'd love to see certainly is how can this kind of food sort of come down in price, make it more accessible, and give people the opportunity to choose it on a daily basis at their local grocery store, whatever that means. Maybe it's not Superstore, but maybe it's that smaller shop if the local economy allows for it. So it's kind of a circle, isn't it? It's kind of all these things are sort of connected in a way, right?
Yeah, and there's variations too. There's some solutions to that we also film. Like this season, we filmed a a garden, a remediated piece of land that was like 2 acres of industrial land. The food bank and associated folks in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, got the idea that they should take this land that was in disuse and remediate it. So they brought it back for a couple of years of cover cropping and tillage and things like that, and then a series of tests to make sure the soil was healthy. Once they had that done, they started planting, and we filmed that process the last year of it, not the first two, where they planted this massive garden. And it was also kind of a grazing garden, a community garden that people could just walk by and pluck a tomato off a plant if they wanted, or pull out a carrot, or they planted berries too. So the berries would start producing in the next couple of years. So soon people would just be able to pull raspberries off as they walk by. But it's in an inner city neighborhood in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. And, I think it's almost 2 acres of garden. And all the excess from that garden that that people don't just take, is harvested up and taken back to the food bank and redistributed that way. So there are a lot of community groups that are showing that, gardening can be for all manner of different communities, as long as there's the land and the labor, and of course the water, you can make it happen. And those kind of stories are just so warming, right? To see people that really, you see people in some of these poorer communities that just don't really know produce as well as they might. They don't know the difference between a Roma tomato and an heirloom tomato, or for lack of a better example. But so to see people kind of coming back to that really baseline knowledge of plants and food that we can eat is really great. We need to see more of that.
I love the stress relieving, like nature of it all too. And again, we're back to that aging well. By the way, I don't know the difference between those tomatoes either. I clearly don't know my tomatoes. I know how they taste, and they look great. And they taste great in lots of food. But yeah, I think this idea of getting back to nature. I love the shots of the hands and the soil, and just really, and your comment about choice, the intention behind all of this is so important. Sadly, we're going to have to wrap it up here in a couple minutes. Tell me, really, this is a film about, or these are short films about the environment, period, aren't they? Isn't this about, isn't this a prophetic sort of series in a sense?
Yeah. It that comes up a lot in our interviewing. When I'm interviewing folks in the garden, they talk about, how wonderful it is to grow vegetables or flowers. There's a lot of flower gardeners too.
Sure.
We're talking a lot about vegetables right now, but the other underlying principle that keeps coming up is that you're essentially working with what nature does. So you're dealing with plants and growing and light and the environmental conditions. And when you're tuned into that, it's all about nature. And we're all nature. We're all just creatures of the earth. We're just animals. And we're just ingesting plants and other animals sometimes too. And that's the basic core of it all. And how you get there, whether that's a walk in the forest harvesting mushrooms, or whether that's a little pot full of flowers and greens on your balcony in your urban setting, either way, you're connecting to nature. And whether that's having an impact in a big way that can be measured, or whether it's just having an impact on you as a person, either is valid as the other. And it's really important that we just realize that nature never stops being nature. It's always doing something. It's always trying to create for us and help us and lead us, really.
I was waiting for another comment, but I don't think we need it. That was I think a lovely way to wrap up our conversation today here with Ian Toews. We've been talking about his new TV series on Vision TV called Ageless Gardens. Writer, director, producer, you're doing everything, Ian? Or you've got quite a team, no doubt.
Well, it's a small team. It's a great team, but we're a really small operation. These days in documentary production in Canada, maybe even the world, certainly in Canada, which is what I know about, it's pretty hard to do it unless you can do 3 or 4 or 5 jobs. So I end up doing 3 or 4 or 5 jobs. Right. And the rest of my team also in different ways does 3 or 4 or 5 jobs. So
how often on the shoot did you ever have a shovel in your hand, is the question?
Yes, I have. I've been asked to help. I've been asked to pull things out and put the camera down.
That's so
and
good.
That's a good honor. I like that.
So it's agelessgardens.ca. You can find season 1 there, season 2 coming up in late September, and probably there as well on the website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of the episodes are listed on the website, agelessgardens.ca as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Yeah, it was a nice chat.